real stories of werewolves, of dogmen from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
If you saw our last episode, you know that I recently got my digital hands on an audiobook version of Linda Godfrey's 2019 book, I Know What I Saw. It's got some great true stories of strange creatures, and tonight I'd like to sort of adapt her chapter on the witchy wolves of Omer, Michigan. If you find yourself wanting to read more about this, we'll have a link to pick up your own copy of the book in our description. Just so you know, the channel would make a small commission if you use that link, but I recommend this book to all cryptid fans no matter what means you use to get a hold of it. So what are witch wolves or witchy wolves? Well, it seems to sort of be another way to talk about werewolves, but these are not your typical werewolves, and the tradition of these particular werewolves or supernatural wolves in this area goes way back to the 1800s. In the book, Linda Godfrey goes to some pains to point out that in Europe, the idea of werewolves was inextricably linked to the idea of witchcraft. It was thought that some wolves are real, natural creatures, but others are in actuality witches or vampires able to present themselves as wolves. These were considered mainstream beliefs in Europe in those days. People were put to death for being a witch or a werewolf for around 300 years, ending about 1630. In the U.S., we revived the tradition in the later 1600s with the famous Salem witch trials, but the American version went heavier on the witches and a whole lot lighter on the werewolves. Still, the idea of supernatural wolves was in the minds of people who came from Europe to live here, and the concepts and traditions were passed down to each new generation. Officially, wolves were wiped out in this part of Michigan by 1935, yet to this day people still continue to report seeing these creatures, or being harassed by invisible versions of them, like werewolves mixed with the predator. Now, although she did speak firsthand with witnesses whenever possible, the majority of Godfrey's chapter on the witchy wolves is based on two anonymous articles clipped out of old newspapers and sent to Linda by fans of her writing. I'm unsure if she tells us the date of the first article, but it is detailing events that happened in the 1800s. Godfrey has succeeded in discovering that there were in fact people with these family names in the area in those days, but Linda was unable to confirm the actual details of these stories. However, as I said, she has established that these stories seem to be about real people who have actually existed in the area. So, during the American Civil War, many prisoners died not of their wounds, but of malnutrition. There was a disease rampant back then, but hardly known at all today, that was known colloquially as scurvy. Scurvy was a horrible way to die, but it was easily preventable. You just needed to get some vitamin C in your diet from some source. Then the scurvy would go away. Sailors used to get scurvy too, until they began bringing large amounts of lemons and limes with them on their sea voyages. In fact, that's where the derogatory term for British people comes from, when people call them limeys. It's because the British sailors used to suck on limes, and therefore avoid getting scurvy. But the Confederate prison keepers did not care if their Union prisoners starved or how they passed away, and so Corwin Kearney, son of the Kearneys of Omer, Michigan, died in military prison in 1865 of scurvy and malnutrition. It took about 30 years for his remains to be shipped back to his family in Omer, with them finally arriving in a box about the size of a shoebox in 1895. The family placed the box in a normal-sized coffin and had it buried in a cemetery about 3 miles from Omer. Godfrey found Corwin Kearney's grave number listed in the historical record, so the story up to this point seems to be 100% true. Then things get crazy. On May the 1st of 1896, when a group of the town residents showed up at the cemetery with rakes and shovels and hoes to do their yearly spring cleanup of the place, they reached the grave of their Civil War hero. However, they discovered that it had been dug up and was in the process of being used as a birthing den by what they described as a very large she-wolf. Feeling threatened, the huge female creature leaped out of the grave and created such noise that from out of the woods surrounding the cemetery emerged other, even larger, male wolves. The men used their garden equipment to fend off attack from the monster wolves as they beat it out of there, happy to escape with their lives. After some time had passed, the town reassembled with a group of armed men and returned to the grave, finding it had been abandoned by the wolves. It seems a certain local resident named Mrs. Gorey, who does seem to have been an actual historical person, allegedly told the others of a legend from her native Tennessee. It seems that rumors went around during the Civil War that the remains of Northern soldiers were having a witch curse placed upon them before being returned to their families. She pointed out the label Scorbutus that had been placed on Corwin Kearney's box of remains, and declared that it was the curse of Scorbutus which had caused the werewolf and her cubs to materialize in the grave. Now it turns out that Scorbutus is actually the scientific name for scurvy, which is what Kearney died of. But that didn't matter to the townsfolk. So as I said, the villagers armed themselves and returned to the grave. Local undertaker Fred Mercer, who was an actual real person from history, was brought out to examine the bones in the shoebox-sized container that had been shipped back to Omer. Now, according to this anonymous article, Undertaker Mercer said he felt those were not human bones at all, but in fact were the bones of a witchy wolf, a supernatural wolf. Well, that was all the proof the town needed. Reverend Key from the Omer Presbyterian Church was brought over to the grave. He is said to have read hours of prayers related to exorcism until Mercer the Undertaker declared that the spirit of the witchy wolf had moved on. The coffin was reburied, and the town went home, hoping this was all over. Well, it might have been for their generation, but the story of the witchy wolves would only get wilder as the town moved into the future. Godfrey was sent another old newspaper clipping with the original source not indicated on it. This one seems to have come from the 1970s, judging by the update at the very end. But the majority of this story is said to have happened in the 1920s. The article is entitled, "The Legend of the Witchy Wolves. Omer, Michigan's search continues for missing boys." The article is credited to an obvious fake name, Uncle Moss E. Logs. At any rate, according to the clipping on September 2nd, 1925, 17-year-old Clive Robinson Jr. and 16-year-old Stuart McClavey went missing and were never found. The story that their girlfriends Lottie Pestru and Betty Will told is pretty insane, and it involves the witchy wolves. Godfrey was able to confirm that there were families named McClavey and Pestru in the area back in those days, but nothing more than that. So the two teenage couples went for a ride down forested Tyler Plains Road so they could do a little stargazing and have some privacy. They started hearing the sound of a crying cat. They found it quite distracting. Then an old woman with a hooded robe came out of the woods and asked the boys if they could please rescue her pet cat, who was stuck in a tree. Both boys got out of the car to help, when suddenly there was a horrible shouting sound from the woods. The old lady's hood pulled back to reveal that she had the head of a dog or a wolf. Out of the forest from several directions emerged huge, feral monster wolves, who leaped upon the boys and began doing them in. Betty said Lottie threw up, as Betty realized she had wet her bloomers. The two drove back to town in a panic and returned with over a dozen men. Neither boy was anywhere to be seen, so the next morning, a posse of 300 men was gathered to search the forest. All they found was some bloody dirt, some scraps of clothing, and some bone fragments that might or might not have been related to the incident. 4 days later, a local tracker named S. Mayhew was brought in, and he found large wolf tracks leading down to the swamp. Mayhew sent 9 of his hunting dogs down into that swamp, and only 3 returned. Mayhew called off his search at that point, refusing to go any further. He had found his match, and it was the witchy wolves of Omer. At the end of this article sent in to Godfrey is an update dated November 13th, 1975. Two deer hunters named W. Thick and H. Miggett found a belt buckle partially buried in the clearing where the boys were supposed to have been attacked. It had the initials SM on it, and the hunters assumed this must have stood for Stuart McClavey, one of the two victims of the witch wolves. They gave the buckle to Mike McClavey, Stuart's nephew. So, being a journalist in the old-school original sense of the term, Linda Godfrey decided to take the dates mentioned in these two articles and go search the records of the local newspaper for the Ulmer area. As it turns out, the local paper is not available on microfiche, and in fact, the original paper record was destroyed in a fire years back. That means these stories may never be able to be confirmed. Too much time has passed and the newspapers were not preserved. But on the other hand, this also means they can likely never be debunked either. Godfrey discovered that a writer named David Kulchak had written a piece for Fate magazine number 15 about this very subject. He grew up about 20 miles south of Ulmer Plains, and he used to go there with his friends at night to get scared. He said they would hear the strangest sounds emanating from those woods, something midway between howling and laughing. The legend he had grown up with was a bit different. This version of the witchy wolves claims they are from the Chippewa culture, and that they are invisible like Predator from those movies. Kulchak admitted that none of his friends ever had the nerve to step out of the car in that area. And that was because they had heard stories from friends who said that something invisible came right up to them and knocked them back on their butts. Look, I don't know what's going on over there in Ulmer, Michigan and Ulmer Plains. It doesn't seem like something I would want to mess with. If you're thinking about investigating that place, maybe you shouldn't. Or if you do, make sure you pay up your life insurance premium first, so that your family's taken care of afterward. That's my advice for anyone thinking of messing with the witchy wolves of Ulmer. Linda Godfrey's got even more on this subject as well as other cryptids in her fantastic 2019 book, I Know What I Saw, which you can snag a copy of from the link in the description. If you use that link, this channel makes a bit of a small commission. And now here's Bigfoot with today's executive producer credit. Biggie. He's as cool as he can be. He's tonight's executive producer named Esteban P. Please join me in thanking Esteban P, who just recently rejoined our channel memberships. That means he got to see our new members-only story from a couple days ago, and he's going to get to see the 2 new members-only stories coming out this weekend. Here with more on all that is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.